The Research Council in Norway is a funding agency for research across all disciplines and all sectors. So in Norway we basically have only one research council, which means that we look at things sort of in a more, let's say, more comprehensive way than research councils that have parts of the portfolio. As my title says, R&D effort is key to develop solutions to tackle climate challenges. I think we heard in the previous presentations examples of technologies that are ready for deployment, and we all know it's important to move forward quickly in terms of reducing CO2 emissions, and deploying technology obviously is very important. But what's also important is to have a focus on the development of new technologies. We need radically new solutions in order to solve the long-term challenge of climate change. It's not surprising to hear somebody from the Research Council saying that R&D is important, but I think also what Christian was alluding to, what the initiative that now has been recently launched with this 20 countries standing behind this mission innovation, and also in a combination with an initiative that Bill Gates has taken on the investor side. I think that puts R&D very high on the agenda in also a policy context, which I think is, if not new, at least it's a breakthrough for looking also at the long-term efforts that we need, and the need for scaling up R&D efforts in this area. This is a picture taken a week ago of 20 leaders, or leaders of 20 countries, and they all committed to that they will scale up R&D efforts to develop clean energy technologies by a factor of 2 over 5 years. So it's a quite unique agreement between countries, and it clearly has to be followed up on a national level in terms of scaling up budgets, but there is also a coordination and collaboration part of this. So Bill Gates has been a pusher for this initiative, and I think there's been some connections between his initiative and the government-led initiative. And it's highlighting the need for that we really need to make a big effort now over the next few years to develop, to make a leap forward in terms of developing new technologies that can be later on implemented and then ultimately help us solve the climate challenge. So it's, to use the jargon, it's not just a market pull, it's not just policies in place to put technologies into the market, but this is very strong effort on a technology push as well. So why is this important? This is a figure taken from the International Energy Agency's analysis. There are many similar figures, but it basically shows or illustrates what is needed to go from a business as usual scenario and down to a 2-degree scenario. And in order to do so, we basically need to turn every stone. There is no silver bullet. There's no single technology that can help us solve the climate challenge. We need to have a broad effort in order to develop technologies across the board in all sectors, and including power generation. So I won't say much more about that. And I should also add, though, which is very important, it's often forgotten when at least we discuss this in Europe, there are also clearly the challenge of providing energy to all, addressing energy poverty, addressing the needs of developing countries is very important, because we're talking about different technologies in many cases that will be needed to be applied in developing countries than in developed countries. So that's also an important part of this picture. So, and then, of course, this doesn't come for free. IEA and others have calculated what this will cost. The numbers look extremely big. They can translate into about $1,000 billion in increased investments every year for the next 35 years. However, this is only about 30% higher than what is already invested in the wide energy sector. So that's one part of it. Another part of that is that we save a lot of energy when we do these investments. So there is less money spent on energy expenditures. The energy bills are lower, but the investment costs are higher. So this is, on a global scale, it's exactly equivalent to what happens in your house. If you insulate your house, you buy a heat pump or whatever you do, you pay upfront, you pay more, you invest, you may have to take up a bank loan, but then you save in the longer run. It's exactly the same thing when we're talking about solving the climate challenge. But the problem is, of course, to get this money up front and to invest them in the right technologies. But of course, the side effect of that is that it will also open up an enormous market for these new technologies. Basically, a shift from energy markets to more technology-oriented market. So why is R&D important in this picture? Well, the thing is, investing in the right technologies, that's an important point. If you start investing in technologies that are not fully developed and at the full potential, it might be much more expensive. IA and others, again, have calculated this and see that if you start too early with the deployment, it's going to be expensive. So it's important to reduce costs, to have focus on R&D. And these costs are much smaller than the deployment support costs typically will be. It costs much more to subsidize a technology into the market that is not ready than it costs to put more money into the R&D phase of that same technology. However, it's urgent. We need this action now because we do need the technologies as soon as possible. This is actually an old slide. I've used this for many, many years. But now, actually, things happened with this mission innovations. Now it's not just some call to governments and politicians. Now, actually, things are happening. So that's very good news. Which takes me to the last point, namely that these investments cannot be mobilized entirely by private capital because of the risks involved. We need governmental efforts. Then I'll talk a little bit about what we've done in Norway, because we have had such a step up, pretty much a doubling of R&D efforts over only 2 years in Norway. Going back to 2008, there was a decision in the Norwegian Parliament across all parties, more or less, that they would step up funding for clean tech R&D, which led to more than a doubling. This is 600 million Norwegian kroner, which is equivalent of a bit less than $100 million US. So it's a significant increase, as illustrated by this figure. And I'll just say a few words now about how we implemented that increase and what it did result to as an illustration of what can be gained through a now much more important, of course, because it's a multilateral effort through this mission innovation. So, success criteria, because this was successful. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. The first thing was that it was a long-term commitment. It was not just some money that showed up in the national budget 1 year and then gone next year. This was said, we're going to step up, it's going to happen over several years, gave a signal to industry, to research institutions that they can actually start build up the capacity, they can start invest in labs. It was a signal that this will last for a longer time period. It was targeted, it was aimed at the areas, particularly at the areas where Norway can make a difference when it comes to energy research. It had a broad involvement. Industry was mobilized, research institutions were mobilized, and I'll actually get back to that in a second. So, but this, in order to, in fact, do mobilize the scientific community, do mobilize universities, research institutions to build up capacity, and very important, mobilize industry to see the opportunities that lies in green technology. This was back in 2008. It was not so evident, especially not in Norway. We have a strong petroleum sector, as some of you may know. So it was not evident that green tech was a big business. And another thing was to have sort of a structuring effect of the Norwegian R&D ecosystem in order to indeed harvest these opportunities. So what happened? Well, we did manage to mobilize the R&D institutions. Maybe not so surprising, given that R&D is their primary income, but still, again, it was important that it was predictable. It led to a mobilization of also new, it says here, recruitment of new players, meaning that other research institutions that hadn't primarily been working with renewable energy, for example, started looking into that. So there was a broadening of the R&D community, more focused effort into R&D. Obviously, this led to a strengthening of the knowledge base, much better starting point, much more interesting collaboration partners for Norwegian industry once we built up this R&D system. And this indicator showed here is new PhDs recruited through this. We pretty much had a quadrupling of PhDs coming out annually over research programs through this funding. This, of course, every year, if you produce 4 times as many PhDs in this area, it makes a big difference over time than compared to what we had before. So then to the mobilization of industry. And it's actually very good that Christian was ahead of me, because Energy Nest is one of these companies that received the support from the Research Council through the money we got from this step up. So that's a good example, I think. So again, industry saw this as a big opportunity once they were involved and they understood that the politicians actually meant business with this money. They were long-term. There was a start of a longer-term effort. It did increase the opportunities of green tech, and also it gave a momentum to the traditionally already strong collaboration we have in Norway between industry, research institutions, academia, and the government. So this money was sort of also a collaborative effort in terms of sort of implementing them. What we saw happen, what's illustrated by this figure, which is might be a bit difficult to see, is if we go back to before the step up, and you look after the step up, we see that the number of applicants we get because industry can also apply for money within our portfolio. So we saw that the interest from industry increased more than the budget increase. We had almost a tripling of budget, but we had more than a tripling in terms of the interest from industry. And you would think that maybe by pushing so much money into the system over only 2 years, you would see the opposite effect. But in fact, it was so mobilizing that it turned out it was more difficult to get money from us. It was harder to get money from us after this budget increase than before, just because of the awareness. So good quality proposals and a good quantity of proposals. So, and also I have alluded to this structuring effect. We had the strengthening of the collaboration between industries and the research institutions we built up. I just want to mention that through this step up, we established centers of excellence when it comes to R&D research, 8-year funding, predictable, primarily in areas where Norway have competence and traditions that can make us a contributor on the international stage, such as CCS, offshore wind, solar. But these centers have also been very important in terms of stimulating collaboration with industry. I don't have time to go more into details. I just want to wrap up by maybe with some lessons learned from this first step up from Norway. First of all, in 2008, I think we thought, in general, that it would go faster in many areas. Maybe not solar, but in other areas, that markets would develop faster. We see that the uncertainties in these markets were something we didn't foresee well enough. I'm not sure if we, as a funding agency, could have done things differently, but clearly some industrial companies went into this and they realized there was a long way before they could start making money. This has clearly to do with why we're all here, lack of policy, lack of agreements related to that, but also access to private capital, Valley of Death, which I encourage you to read this paper that Bill Gates came out with. I guess he launched it last week. He talks about the Valley of Death and that his contributions and his colleagues in this investor group, they're trying to address this Valley of Death challenge, which is exactly this Breakthrough Energy Coalition. You'll find more information about that. I'm sure many of you have picked it up already. So that's one thing, a lesson that we have learned, which is why we think that this global initiative now is very, very important, and we should also try to do something on a national level, I think. The other point is international collaboration. This is very important. R&D collaboration is important on an international level. All scientists know that. So there is a lot of bottom-up collaboration. There is a lot of collaboration when there is money to apply for example, within the EU framework programs. But what's missing, I think, is sort of more of a global effort in order to address specific challenges in collaborations. We have lots of research in different areas, and they're somewhat coordinated, but they're not really mission-oriented in terms of solving challenges. which is also exactly what this mission initiative is, mission innovation is trying to address by setting up, trying to set up roadmaps, for example. So it's about sharing of information, clearly more easier to do when you're a scientist, more difficult if you're a company involved in R&D. This is commitment towards common targets. I just mentioned that we have a joint effort in, for example, dealing with storage issues, solving CCS, different parts of the CCS challenges, and so on. And not last but not least, technology transfer, finding mechanisms so that we can both develop and then deploy technologies in developing countries suited to the needs of the rapidly growing economies that today do not have the access to energy services that we have in Europe, for example. So this is all to some degree addressed in this initiative. Obviously, this has to be implemented and have to be more concrete. But I think it's a very good starting point. And that, of course, we in the Research Council, it's our job to do things like this. We're very excited and we look forward to the implementation. Thank you.